Good morning from WKYT News. I'm Bill Bryant, and we welcome you to Kentucky Newsmakers. Hope you're enjoying your weekend. Later, we'll hear from the president of the Kentucky Distillers Association about the Worldwide Whiskey Summit that was held this week here in Kentucky. Kentucky bourbon makers are really concerned about the tariff tensions around the globe right now, and Gregory will be joining us shortly. But first, the health department in Lexington has had an unusually busy summer. All of a sudden, the Fayette Mall food court closing was attention-getting earlier this week after hundreds of people reported getting sick. It turns out it was norovirus. We'll find out exactly what that is and its unpleasantness. The Hepatitis A outbreak continues statewide, and health officials are trying to get a handle on that situation as well. We found out this week that deaths from drug overdoses in Kentucky continues to climb. A new school year is about to begin. Parents getting busy, and the children are getting checkups and immunizations before the bells start ringing. With us today is Fayette County's Health Commissioner, Dr. Kraig Humbaugh. Thank you for coming. We appreciate it very much.
Glad to be here.
As we said, this was attention-getting out at Fayette Mall, especially since so many go there and so many got sick. What happened at the Fayette Mall food court?
Well, you know, the mission of Lexington Fayette County Health Department is helping Lexington be well, and one of the most visible ways we do that is prevention and control of disease outbreaks. And in this case, we were notified last week about a certain restaurant in the food court at the Fayette Mall that was closing, and rightly so, because they had a lot of sick food service workers, and that was the right thing for them to do. And then we set up a line for a way for people to get a hold of us and let us know if they got sick after eating at the food court. And we discovered that people had eaten at other restaurants as well in the food court, and it became very difficult because of the close proximity of the restaurants and the common areas that they all share to really pin down where the source of the disease was. So we worked very closely with Fayette Mall management, and they were very cooperative, and the restaurants in the food court. They agreed to follow our advice, which was to temporarily close and to disinfect and clean with agents that would cover norovirus. We had suspected potentially norovirus was the cause or associated with this outbreak, because most of the folks that we got called about, we got over 350 contacts about ill people.
That's a lot of sick people.
Yeah, we suspected it was a stomach virus because it was short-lived, and there was a very short incubation period, which is the time between exposure and the time that you get sick.
When we say, you know, get sick in close proximity, is it spread through the air, or is it maybe the utensils or the trays that are commonly used in the area?
It could potentially be all of those, or so it can be person to person in a way. The way it's spread is when a susceptible person ingests small viral particles that are shed through the feces of someone who's infected. So those could all be potential ways that this particular virus is spread.
It seemed very sudden, but you're saying that that's basically the way norovirus works.
That's a common picture, and norovirus is the most common cause of foodborne outbreaks in the United States today.
So you're saying you did not have to move to forcing any closures? I mean, there was good cooperation.
All voluntary. They closed voluntarily, cleaned with the agents that we recommended, and then all of our inspectors reviewed all of the restaurants and the common areas before they were reopened.
Is there something to learn from this particular situation?
I think, again, good hand washing is always important for both patrons and for the staff of restaurants. And I think that's one of the most important things. We also want to make sure that people, unfortunately, who were affected do not pass it on to family members. So they need to do good hand washing at home and not be preparing food for family members, because we can start seeing secondary or tertiary cases if they don't follow those precautions.
But you do feel that at this point, at least from that particular location, that threat has passed?
So we don't anticipate any issues, but we will continue to follow that situation.
You're careful on that. When you do routine restaurant inspections, is there anything that could have picked up on the potential for something like this?
So our inspectors, our environmental inspectors, regularly inspect restaurants in Fayette County twice a year. They try to do, inspect everything from the way that the food is being presented to how the dishes are being sterilized and the equipment are being sterilized, and making sure that sick food workers don't come into work. So those are all the things they're emphasizing to management, and in general, restaurants do a very good job with that and are very compliant throughout the county.
What is required, Commissioner Humbaugh, of a food handler in terms of they have to have some kind of certification?
They do have to have a food handler card, and they get that by training that we provide both online, and we also have in-person classes, so you can do it either way through the Lexington-Fayette County Health Department.
And of course, this all comes, this sudden outbreak, in the middle of a hepatitis A outbreak that is statewide. More cases in Kentucky than anywhere in the country right now. Louisville has had the bulk of the cases. Lexington has not had so many. Do you think we're getting a handle on that?
I do think that certainly in the Louisville area that the curve is starting to shift, and that it's starting to flatten there a little bit, which is good, which means they're not seeing the increase in cases, but the rest of the state continues to see increases. We don't want to confuse people because we're talking about two different viruses here this morning, and hepatitis A, we have no evidence that that was associated with the outbreak at the food court.
Let's make that very clear.
Yes, thank you. There are, both of these types of viruses are spread fecal orally like we talked about, but the similarity ends there. Hepatitis A can be a lot more serious. It can cause liver problems and can cause you to get jaundice, which is yellowing of the skin and eyes. In this case, again, there's been over 1,100 cases in the state of hepatitis A. The number one way to prevent this is through vaccination. However, most of us who are adults have not been vaccinated. For children, most providers have been giving this vaccine to kids for the last several years. But most of us who are adults, the vaccine wasn't around when we were kids.
Should adults see about getting it?
So adults who are interested, we encourage them to talk to their provider or get it at their pharmacy. We always ask people to call ahead and make sure their provider or their pharmacist is offering it and that their insurance pays for it. Fortunately, most insurance plans do pay for the hepatitis A series, which is a 2-dose series, one now and one 6 months later. And then children are starting to be required to get hepatitis A.
As they head back to school, Fayette County schools have indicated that if the children are not vaccinated, they will assist parents or could take it to the step of getting more forceful.
So we really appreciate Fayette County Public Schools working to assure that all children are up to date on all of their vaccines, not just the new requirements for this year, so that they can be healthy during the entire school year. And our school health nurses who are employed by the health department and in schools will help to assist in getting all kids vaccinated.
And what are the basic requirements for vaccines in Kentucky at that time?
So, there are all the requirements are very age specific, so it's difficult to talk about what's required for all children. So there are requirements for children in daycare to be able to attend daycare, as well as requirements for school-age kids. And children in elementary school have different requirements than those that are in high school. Another new requirement for kids is a booster dose of meningococcal vaccine. Meningococcal vaccine is against a type of meningitis, which is a swelling of the spinal cord and the brain, and the booster is to now be given at 16 years of age. So we'll also be working with the schools to help kids be able to get that booster shot if you're 16
so
years
even
age
young adults
older.
maybe heading to college need to be.
And that's an age where meningitis is more prevalent, so the incidence is higher in that young adult population, and that's why it's important for them to get that booster at 16 years of age.
You're a very experienced public health administrator, but first, you're a pediatrician, and so just tell us a few of the good habits that maybe parents should be getting their kids into the routine, as we're now just a couple of weeks away from school.
Right. Well, first of all, we just talked about that, but you should put vaccines on your back-to-school checklist. But also good sleep habits, so this is a good time to start thinking about changing your child's routine, getting ready for school to start in a couple of weeks. So even getting children to bed just 15 minutes or 30 minutes earlier each night to gradually prepare them if they've been going to bed later during the summertime. So this is the time to start changing all of those routines so that they'll be well rested and ready to learn when they start back to school.
The climb in drug overdose numbers is very disheartening. The state and local governments have been working hard to try to head this off. We know that fentanyl is now a major and apparently growing concern. It's disappointing, isn't it?
Yes, I think it is difficult for those of us who work in this area. On the other hand, there is some reason for optimism. We see more and more naloxone or Narcan being distributed in communities. We do that at our needle exchange program from 11 to 1 on Fridays. It's open for anyone who wants to come, take the class, and get a free kit. And that's one of the major ways that we can help prevent overdoses in the state. So I think that's becoming more prevalent, as well as interventions at the emergency department level at a lot of places, including here in Lexington. So there is a lot going on in this area, but on the other hand, we know it's a major public health issue, and we want to see that curve changed.
Yeah, keep looking for that light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah.
Dr. Humbaugh, thanks for coming by as always. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Hope you'll stay with us. We have some information about this week's Worldwide Whiskey Summit that was held here in Bourbon Country, and that's coming next on Kentucky Newsmakers. We welcome you back to WKYT's Kentucky Newsmakers, and we're glad you're here. A Worldwide Whiskey Summit in Kentucky has been addressing retaliatory tariffs and the future of the bourbon and whiskey business. It all comes as the bourbon business has been booming in the Commonwealth. The Bourbon Trail is busy. Distilleries are rushing to get their product out. Eric Gregory is the president of the Kentucky Distillers Association and led that summit this week in Louisville. Thanks for coming. We appreciate it
Absolutely.
very much.
No, thanks for having us.
Eric, what concerns were brought to the table at this whiskey summit, which I now find out we're all trading partners in this?
We are,
yeah.
and it was great. This is the first time the leaders of the 9 world whiskey organizations have ever got together. So just first of all, a very historic gathering to talk and discuss our issues, trade obviously being on the front burner. We were kind of pleasantly surprised, I guess, Wednesday night before our summit started when President Trump and President Juncker from the EU got together and announced that they were moving back towards zero-to-zero tariff access, which has been, something that has been concerning us now for a few months. We're kind of just caught in the middle of all this, quite frankly. This trade war that's going on. Kentucky's been targeted for tariffs from the bourbon industry because it's such a significantly unique product to America and to the U.S., and we have some deep political ties, as you know very well.
Well, I mean, let's get right to that. Is the fact that Senator Mitch McConnell is the majority leader of the U.S. Senate and Kentucky's senior senator,
one of the most powerful men in Washington,
which gives Kentucky advantages in many ways, but at the same time, is this why Kentucky is targeted in this situation?
Well, I don't think it's any surprise that they targeted Harley-Davidson, Wisconsin cheese, and Kentucky bourbon. So they're obviously aiming at Speaker Ryan and Leader McConnell. But I can say Leader McConnell's office has been tremendous to work with through all this. And again, we're just kind of caught in the middle. We're not pointing fingers at anybody at this point. We just want to get them to get this resolved as quick as possible.
Now, here is the scenario where you have the ownership of these companies, even worldwide, is quite interwoven. So if when entities start taxing each other or tariffing each other, it all kind of collapses on itself, doesn't it? Or
it does, and that's been our biggest fear is escalation. So the EU, Mexico, and Canada and some other countries put anywhere between a 10 to 25% tariff on American whiskey. Obviously, Kentucky bourbon being one of the largest export markets. And we were concerned that if we responded in kind and said we're going to put a 25% tariff on Scotch or Canadian whiskey, that it would just get in this back and forth tit for tat thing and really evolve into a prolonged trade war. But you're right, because back in the 70s and 80s, when bourbon took a nosedive, unfortunately, a lot of our major players in Kentucky, like Brown-Forman and Jim Beam, diversified. So now they not only own Kentucky bourbon distilleries, they own a Scotch whiskey distillery, an Irish whiskey distillery, a Canadian whiskey distillery, tequila distillery in Mexico. So if we got into this back and forth, they could be looking at taking 2 and 3 and 4 hits, and that's just not good for Kentucky.
People may not realize that the U.S. Imports a lot of whiskey from around the world as well. Tell me a little bit about that. How does it all balance out?
Yeah, we actually probably import more than we export. We have been very fortunate with some of these free trade agreements over the past generation. NAFTA and the EU agreement in the 90s, where they send us more than we send them. The good news is we're all one big whiskey family, and Americans like to drink whiskey, whether it's bourbon or Scotch or Japanese whiskey. It's a very growing category over here. That's one of the things where we wanted the summit to get together. We're all kind of in this together to see if anybody had ideas or how we can speak with one voice. And we were so proud for them to come to Kentucky, the birthplace of bourbon, and really just have a good, close the doors, open the room up for a meeting and chat.
What are some other concerns apart from the bottled and aged bourbon that is sold? I mean, there are other products that go into making the whiskey, and I think that there's also a concern there, right?
Yeah, we've got actually the second highest spin-off factor in the state of Kentucky behind our automobile industry. So for every bourbon job that's created or every distilling job that's created, it creates about 3 more down the line. And that's everything from our hardworking farm families to cooperages, still makers, hospitality, trucking companies, et cetera. So you can create 3 jobs down the line, or you can impact 3 jobs down the line if something happens, which obviously we don't want to. So again, worried about escalation. This wouldn't just hurt our bourbon distillers, it would hurt a lot of other people down the line as well, and we want to make sure we take care of those Kentuckians.
Are there some other areas where that there are concerns about trade in terms of where this thing goes if it does go off the rails? I mean, are there what is your best case scenario and your worst case scenario?
Well, best case is we get it done quickly.
Yeah.
Again, we are very encouraged by the president's announcement the other day. Our concern now is, and one of the things we did call for at our summit was for leaders to continue engaging in a timely dialogue to get this done sooner than later before any further harm comes. Worst case scenario is, the blessing and the curse of Kentucky bourbon is you can't make it overnight. So the bourbon that's on the shelf right now was produced 6, 8, 10, 12 years ago. So in the future here, if our predictors, our experts with their crystal balls look out and see an unstable global market, which has driven much of the bourbon industry the past few years, well, do they start to cut back production? And then if they cut back production, again, that trickle-down effect, starts to hit a lot of different people, all the way down even to education. You got to remember that a majority of the taxes that bourbon pays goes back to fund local education through the barrel taxes. So if for some reason, heaven forbid, we start laying down less bourbon, that's even less tax money coming back to local governments and education. That's worst case scenario. Again, we hope it doesn't get there, but it's something that's on our radar screen.
When you're talking to elected leaders, whether they're in the legislative branch or executives, do they understand this importance?
Yeah, they do. The frustrating part with all this is, what can we do to help? They were all calling us and asking us, Eric, how can we be of help here? And we feel kind of powerless at times too, because these are decisions being made at the highest levels of government, obviously. Andy Barr has been working tirelessly on our behalf. So has Congressman Yarmouth, and the entire delegation, Leader McConnell, making sure that our message is carried to the policymakers in Frankfurt and Washington at the highest levels. We've had a meeting with Vice President Pence in Versailles when he came here to visit a few months ago, thanks to Congressman Barr. We've had distilleries meet with members of the Trump administration. So we're getting our message out there. It's now hopefully that they're listening to that message and start to actually see some action.
Just when this was first starting, there was talk of some of the American companies trying to move some of the product overseas.
Harley-Davidson.
Yeah, to have it,
Yeah.
and that was to manufacture that. But there was
Right.
also talk of potentially just moving product so that it was available and you could kind of maybe wear this thing out.
Right.
Is that?
Some of them did that.
Yeah.
Some of the larger distilleries that have the global distribution network to do that did move some product overseas to give them a little cushion in hopes that this is just a short-term problem. And I've heard some of them have told me that that could last them as long as till the first of the year. So that's good. The biggest concern that we heard yesterday, especially from the American Craft Distillers Association, is the effect on the smaller craft distilleries. They are just now getting into these markets, and they have been raising capital and setting back their product, and it's just now becoming of age. Margie Lehrman, who's the head of the ACSA, actually was giving anecdotes yesterday and saying that she's got distillers around the country who are now being told by their export companies, we don't need your product while this is going on. And so they've got cases just sitting there. That's going to hurt them, and they don't have the funding and the capital like a big distillery does to be able to absorb that while this is happening. So we're worried that some of the smaller ones could actually go out of business.
So what is the strategy going forward?
Keep talking. That's, we unfortunately don't have any silver bullet ideas right now, and we didn't expect to come up with them at the summit. But we said, if we can get everybody together, get us on the same page, and identify who we need to be talking to, let's just keep talking and calling for global leaders to continue to sit down, work out a solution, and remove all these tariffs in the spirit of collaboration and free and open trade, especially those on spirits exports.
Eric Gregory is with us from the Kentucky Distillers Association. We're going to come back in just a moment. What is driving the interest in bourbon, and how important is it to Kentucky's economy? Back with that on Kentucky Newsmakers. Welcome back to WKYT's Kentucky Newsmakers, as we're visiting with Eric Gregory, fresh off of the Whiskey Summit, which he calls a historic. That must have been a pretty interesting gathering.
W9, yeah, like the G7. This is the Whiskey 9. It really was, and it was great to hear their perspective on things. And one of the things that we discovered, and we knew this already, but we all share a lot of the common issues, and we did agree that we're going to formalize this partnership and meet at least once a year, if not more, and talk about things like tourism and growth and technical issues, because we just share the same whiskey DNA.
Kentucky has done a good job in recent years taking advantage of the history and the product making process and making that interesting itself to people.
Yeah, it's been fascinating the last decade to really see the rise. I mean, we have tripled our economic output, so we've gone from a $3 billion industry to an $8.5 billion industry in 10 years. We're right in the middle of a $1.2 billion building boom that you mentioned at the opening, building everything from new distilleries to state-of-the-art bottling centers, tourism attractions, you name it. We've doubled our workforce to now 17,500 Kentuckians with really good paying, steady jobs. And the Kentucky Bourbon Trail is just, growing beyond our wildest dreams. We now have 15 Kentucky Bourbon Trail distilleries and another 14 on the Kentucky Bourbon Trail Craft Tour. So we're leading the way in tourism. We always think Kentucky is the gold model for whiskey anyway, the gold standard. And one important thing that I think that's really worth noting is we have also upped our game in the responsibility effort. You may have seen some of the press conferences we have during holidays. We've been giving out, like during the Christmas holiday or for 4th of July, $20,000 worth of free rides. And we really want to make sure that nobody ever has any reasons to get behind an automobile these days and drink and drive. There are too many options with Lyft and Uber and things like that. So we've really been trying to do more with the responsibility as well.
And another similar area to that, there was this recent collapse of a storage facility over near Bardstown and some environmental impact from that. Were there lessons learned from that situation?
Well, we don't know. The owner of that the distillery, the Sazerac Company, isn't a member of our association, and I think they're still trying to go through their investigative process to figure out exactly why that happened and what they, what lessons they could have learned. So we reached out to them and told them we always stand ready to assist, and we would love to know more about it when the details finally come in, so we can again have a best practices meeting and make sure that it doesn't happen with any more warehouses.
What happened over this last decade? Did laws become more conducive in Kentucky? I mean, it seems, don't I remember people pouring whiskey on the Capitol steps a few years back?
You have a good memory, yes. In 2009, we faced our second tax hike in 4 years, and we protested with a little bourbon tea party in the Capitol steps and poured some whiskey out to let the legislature know that we didn't appreciate just being seen as a revenue source. And that was a good wake-up call for us, and it was a great wake-up call for the legislature, because ever since then, we've had a great partnership with them. You still have a lot of Dry County legislators over there, and they may not understand bourbon as a drink, but they do understand tourism, and they understand economic development. So once we started talking about how many jobs that bourbon provides, the tourism factor, which is really helping local economies, then we started changing laws. So now we've got a law that allows distilleries to sell cocktails. So that's really helping us leverage our Napa Valley type experiences on the Kentucky Bourbon Trail. We've got a vintage spirits law that's become the model of the country, where consumers can actually sell back bottles to retailers, so we can have the bars and restaurants with the world's best whiskey libraries right here in Kentucky, where they should be. And then just this past legislature, we passed House Bill 400, a shipping bill, which is something that wineries have been able to do for the last 40 years. California started that in the early 70s. There are now 44 wine states to ship to. Well, there's only 7 states you can ship whiskey to. So we've got that in Kentucky. We were kind of the first domino to fall, and now we're hoping to go around and find more reciprocal states, so when visitors come here to visit the Kentucky Bourbon Trail, they don't have to pack all that in their suitcase and take it on an airplane back home. They can just ship it back to their hometown.
You have a pretty good job for an old newspaper guy, don't you?
I tell you, I'm living the dream for a newspaper reporter. It's been great. We've been riding the wave ever since. I still miss my reporter days. Yeah, we're having a good time.
Eric Gregory, thanks for coming by.
Thank you,
really
Bill. It's always good to see you.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us for this edition of WKYT's Kentucky Newsmakers. We'll see you bright and early this week on WKYT This Morning. We start at 4:30, so we're up when you're up. We're here. Thank you for being with us. Make it a good week ahead.